Welcome to On the Rec Yard, Women's Prison Podcast, where we are live on the Rec Yard every Wednesday night. Hey, hi everybody. I just need to make a special announcement right quick before we get started. For those of you who've been with us for a while, you guys know that Toonche floats into this online studio about 30 seconds before we're supposed to go live. And I think we've even started a show without her because she was late. And today I got a text at 6:00 p.m. Central Standard Time letting me know she's in the studio because she forgot what time we were supposed to be starting. Toonche, what's going on with you?
I was so full of anxiety because you've roasted me several times about not being on time or just coming in right in on time. I'm like, damn it, I'm going to be early today. And I was literally an hour and 5 minutes early. So you've been putting up with a lot of my rambles and stories while you were working as we were waiting for 7:00. So you're welcome. You're welcome.
Well, I'm really proud of you guys. We are on the Rec Yard Women's Prison Podcast. We are live every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Central Time, Texas time. We both did time in Texas prisons. My name is Marci Marie.
I'm Toonche.
And I'm just so happy to be with you tonight, Toonche. I'm happy to see all of you guys.
No, you know what Diane told me? BF Diane said, I love how you and Marci, y'all have such great, banter. It's always great. And I love the way she says Toonche and Toonche. She goes, but honey, it reminds me of me and you, except Marci goes harder. She goes harder. She gives it to you. And I said, she does. I cry a lot of times when we get off of here. And I'm like, Marci roasted me. And no, I'm just kidding. I don't cry at all because I'm a sociopath. So
you're dead inside. No, you're really not, Toonche. You're the sweetest thing ever. And if I ever made you cry, I don't even know how I'd handle myself. I only give it to you because I know you can take it. Right?
That's it. See? Yeah. No. I'm a tough old bird. So speaking of being tough, tonight we're talking about hauntings and scary bumps in the night in our prisons and jails. Because, those of you who've been locked up, you all know the ghost stories, especially if you did time at some of those units that were older with a long history. Marci, Lane Murray is relatively, well, it's not new. It's been there about 20 years or 25 years. But in terms of being new to the Gatesville unit, pretty new. So how often did y'all have ghost sightings and such?
Listen, Toonche, I am open to that. Okay. First of all, my being, I believe that we are energy and energy goes somewhere. I definitely believe in paranormal activity and all of that stuff. I live in my family home where we have lost 2 family members, and I feel them often, like they're there. And I at the Dr. Lane Murray unit in Gatesville, which is right next to a cemetery even, I never experienced any kind of spookiness. Never. But the Dr. Lane Murray unit, definitely some raw stuff happened there. Definitely there were a lot of deaths, unnecessary deaths, definitely cruelty and all of those things, but not quite what you experienced because of the history of the other units, right?
Yes. Yeah. So many of you who've been with us on our journey here, we've talked a lot about the women's units in Gatesville, Texas. Now there's a men's unit, Hughes, up the hill, relatively newer unit compared to the units in the Gatesville unit and Mountain View. Okay. So the history of this area Goes back all the way to the late 1800s, 1887. This land was set aside for facilities for what was known as the Gatesville Boys Home. It changed names through the years, but this is really where the Texas Youth Commission started. These units were originally for the boys' home. Now, if one day in the future we'll do a whole history dive into the youth system, because it's one of those topics that I really like to educate people about. But long history, long history, y'all, over 100 years of beatings and cruelty, sexual abuse, horrid stuff against children. Okay, so that land, and like you, Marci, I'm a spiritual person. I have my spiritual faith background. I do believe that kind of places hold energy. You know what I mean? And things are attracted to that, I think, too. So these facilities are many of them are still in the same buildings, right? The Hilltop unit they only just recently, over the past couple of years, tore one of the buildings down that was so dilapidated and dangerous. I mean, it still had the old horse tying post out near the chow hall area that you tie your horse to from. So these are old units with a lot of violent, terrible history, especially with children. So we had stuff happen all the time that you can't explain, or sometimes it's just a feeling that you get, the hair standing up on the back of your neck. But so do you want me to tell you some of those stories and maybe some other? Well, I see somebody right here, and this is probably somebody. Oh, this is Desiree.
Yeah.
She says, go ahead.
Desiree says that she was cleaning under her cubicle after moving to the Sycamore unit and found a long, heartbreaking letter that was written. She found it under her bed from a lonely little boy praying for family, visitors, or a friend. So maybe a piece of history, I wonder, or something more like newer.
Yeah, or something ghostly. Yes, and Annie here was. I don't want to give your business out, Miss King, but yeah. So what we would say, as mentioned, we would say the little boys. The little boys are at it. Something grabbing your foot in the middle of the night, something brushing up. Now that happened a lot, and that even happened to me. And what's interesting, Marci, is it's hard to prove or disprove supernatural things, right? But it was always interesting to me that those sensations I would have, those nightmares I would have, and I don't sleep well now, but they don't happen to me here. They don't happen to me in this space. They didn't happen to me at Maggie's house. They didn't happen to me in my apartment at Henderson. Sometimes at my dad's house, and there's a whole long history to my family. But definitely throughout the years of my incarceration. So if it was just me and my sleeping patterns and something in my sleep, then why wouldn't it happen now? You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You can, how that sensation you get when you know somebody's staring at you? You can feel it, right?
Sure.
And you turn around and somebody's staring at you. That is the kind of sensations you would get a lot in these spaces. Or doors shutting, or those classic ghost story haunting things. And Miss King, and I still call her Miss King. She says she didn't care if I tell y'all that she was a mean officer. She was not a mean officer. She was one of the very few that treated us like people. So love that you're here and that you always support our stuff. We adore you. Thank you. So we would call them the little boys are at it again.
And I would hear that from the ladies, especially ladies that had pulled chain to the Murray unit from some of the surrounding units. They would talk about the little boys or sleeping and feeling their covers being pulled off of them while they were asleep.
Mm-hmm.
Which in prison, you might jump up swinging if you start feeling somebody taking your covers off.
Yeah, well, in Marci, it's weird, right? So you didn't experience that, and the girls that typically just did most of their time at Lane Murray never really had that. But if you were at Crane or Mountain View, it happened all the time. It is this sensation of somebody, like if somebody leaned into your cubicle and tapped you on the foot, like real lightly, like so you wouldn't jerk up, and it's like, hey,
Mhm.
they're calling you for mail or something, just tapping that and just grabbing the blanket a little bit and pulling. That's what it was. And so you wake up and you don't wake up freaked out, but you wake up and you're like, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and there's nobody there. And so it's just like, God, it's one of those little boys. And again, it's weird. That's never happened to me here in the world. Um, yeah, Veronica's right too. Like a giggling sensation or hearing people talking. Children, that was always the weird thing too. Even people that didn't know the history of the land and the units would say that they heard, I heard, this the weirdest thing, and the TV wasn't on. It was, the lights were off and I was in my cubicle and I heard a kid laughing. I heard a boy's voice, a child's voice, in the back closet. Like, I thought maybe it was half awake, half asleep. And then you tell folks what the history of the unit is, and they're like, oh my God. Like I literally hear voices, haunted voices. And it's a sad feeling. And it's not a malevolent, like, towards you. Nothing ever felt, girl, the only thing that felt dangerous and malevolent there, is the physical violence of the state. Never any of anything that felt paranormal or haunting and I think, honey, we were so used to it. It was just a way of life. Like, oh, the little boys woke me up last night. Oh, really? Well, girl, it's chow time. Like nobody even, it was just accepted, I guess is what I'm saying, because it happened so often.
And enough people had experienced it that there wasn't people walking around making fun of it or acting like you were exaggerating or making up stories, because everybody, from my understanding, was kind of feeling the same thing.
Right, right. So nobody's gonna be like, "Oh, Jennifer's crazy," she's making stuff up. But it just was so common that it was just like nobody was fearful of it. We feared the guards, and especially the male guards. Like there's where the real violence is. It's not from the haunted energy. And again, I'm not saying this is an entity. I'm not saying it's a ghost. I believe that sometimes energy is like a residue. You know, um, but again, none of us were ever fearful of that. It wasn't scary. It was just, it's there with you. And the energy never felt like it was something against us.
We have a guest commenting saying that they think a little boy used to wake me up by pulling my blanket at the bottom. And I have heard that same scenario told to me during my incarceration, just like I said, from women coming from the other units. Jennifer, do you see who that is saying that? Because I just see that she's watching from.
Yes, it's Brianna.
So, yeah. So, Brianna, yeah, I have definitely heard that.
Well,
Um,
and she goes on to say the little boys just wanted to play. And that's what, that was always the thing that people said, right? It's just kids and they're just being mischievous and they're just wanting attention or to play. That energy is a playful energy. It's strange, it's weird, it's unexplainable, and sad. That was part of it too. A lot of the places on the unit, girl, and if anybody's here from Hilltop, especially, there are certain places. I'm real sensitive to energy in spaces, and you can just feel it. Like you can just feel it. Like stuff here was not good, and it was sad. Um, yeah,
well, there is a graveyard that a lot of those little boys that died while they were in the care of the boys' homes are their remains are buried there. I have a picture of it, so those of you that are watching the show can see, and it kind of just looks pretty basic. you might not even know it's a cemetery just driving by. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
that's
And if those of you that can see it over there to the left, up in the left upper there is Lane Murray. Um, and then you see the tower in the distance. That's where Hilltop and Gatesville unit is out that direction. And when I was on the host squad at Lane Murray, uh, we they would take us over there because then up there is the pig pens and the slop, but that we would stop there and we would have to clean the cemetery. So we would have to go in with um, our little hose and rakes and pick weeds and clean them up. And so when you walk in, and those of you that can see it, it's kind of a bricked off square with a little entrance, and you go in there and there's little headstones. Um, and trust me, I'm sure that that's just what's remaining, because the amount of children that died while in the care of the Texas Youth Commission and the boys' home in Gatesville, just is endless number. But these headstones are broken. Sometimes they'd have a name, or they'd just say John Doe, or you couldn't even read it. They're not well, um, you know, cared for, other than making the people who were incarcerated go in and pick the weeds around it. But there is the cemetery. It's real. That's real. And y'all, these kids weren't dying because the Spanish flu and you know, just, you know, healthcare. They were beaten to death. They were sexually assaulted. They were starved. And now, of course, that's not at the time what was, you know, made public. But a lot of these boys didn't have family. Um, but what we know now is that, you know, much of these deaths were caused by those who were entrusted to care for them.
in a very violent way, which seems to be kind of a theme with spirits or energy that kind of hold on to a place. There's some kind of a violent act to that. I want to read what Desiree, I put it on the screen just for a moment, but it's a pretty long comment. She has a lot of information. She says there's a tunnel from the Riverside unit to reception that was built to transport the boys. But according to boys that survived and several officers who also worked at the school, it was used for night court when bad actors needed an attitude adjustment. So it was a place behind the scenes. No prying eyes that might not be approval of that kind of attitude. It says occasionally the whooping went too far and the records and families were told the boys escaped and ran away.
Mm-hmm.
Golly, I'm going to read this off of here so I can read the rest of it. But she said, one officer, the son of a beloved sergeant, told me some of the stories. He was just out of high school working at the boys' school with his dad and a brother. He said he could not get some of the scenes out of his mind and often had nightmares. He was a good boss, fair, and a gentleman. A few years later, he took his own life. So,
well, you know, Marcy, that kind of reminds me of something we've talked about when we talked about mental health. You know, it's not just the energy of the people that suffer in these spaces. It is also the officer. We've had several officers unalive themselves at the unit, y'all, in the picket. You know, the guard towers. Over the years, someone would turn the gun on themselves. Because they suffer tremendously, just as much in different ways than we did. So you've just got all this overwhelming history, and these buildings, and I think that plays into it too, right? Like, much of these buildings are still there, so it's not like we've even cleared that off and put a new building to create a new space, even though I still think, you know, energy is still there. These are the same buildings, like Desiree mentioned, seeing something etched into a wall or pavement or a rock from 1920, 1930. I mean, that's it. Trust me, it's been there since then. So that really houses a lot of that energy.
Brienne says legal books say that little boys would be sacked in those back rooms, and sacking is a term that meant beat for hours, taking abuse for hours at a time. Uh, Gosh, golly. I think I knew just a little bit until we started diving into looking at this today and then learning from you, Toonche, because you always come with the big facts and the information. But golly, that's so incredible. Uh, Gosh, thank you, Vanessa. This is an important piece of history. And it's not just in Gatesville, right? These kind of things happen all over. Um, Gosh. And Miss Annie says there were several officers that quit on the spot, and you were right about them playing with you.
Yeah. So H Storm at Mountain View was notorious for having these things happen: the noises, the things moving, people being tugged at in their sleep, touched on their face. Yes, that's true. There were certain spots that were hot spots for that type of weird occurrences.
I didn't ever experience anything in Gatesville, right? But in the middle of my prison term, I did end up at the Skyview unit, which is the Texas Prison Psychiatric Hospital prison, whatever, in Rusk, Texas. I was there for several months, and I don't even know if I actually experienced something, but first of all, let me say the environment there, it was cell block housing, and it was roommates, just roommates, and you really couldn't communicate with anybody in any other cells. So at this time, I had a roommate that was a girl that I knew. Her name was Jody. Shout out to Jody if you're watching or hear this. And we were already just kind of telling some spooky kind of stories because there is some haunting history behind Texas City, the hospital. And so we might get into that in a minute. And so we were kind of talking about that. And in the background at that psych hospital, you would hear women. It was very mentally ill people housed there. Men were on the floors below us. You could hear them crying out. You might hear them talking to themselves. It was like you might see in a movie of hearing those kind of, and so that was already kind of getting at us, right? And then we start talking about these hauntings at Texas City and what her experience was with that. And we felt like, as her and I are like sitting on the floor, Indian style, kind of basically telling ghost stories, we felt like someone was right in our door. We thought the guard was there, so much so like both of us just screamed, and then we jumped up and we're looking down the run to see if the guard had done her rounds, and there was no officer there. So I definitely feel like that was something for us both to jump, but also we were kind of setting the mood for that to
Right.
kind of scare each other. You know how if you were
Right.
like little kids do, and
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm not sure if that was that, but I think that I heard lots of stories about the Skyview unit also from people. And
Yeah,
that's
well, I mean, that would be a place of like really intense energy. Again, going back to, whether it's a ghost or whether it's a spirit or whether it's just leftover energy that is trapped in a space. I remember when me and Alexa, we lived in C dorm together. And so Alexa would take her, yeah, girl, I'm gonna tell your business. But she would take her, they would sell us eye drops, very diluted, not very strong eye drops on commissary, but she would empty that and wash it out. And then when we would go to mass, she would she would get the holy water and fill it up, and then she would, do her cubicle, and she would sprinkle mine or whatever. But there were times, Marci, like I said, it doesn't happen to me here, right? It's not happened in my homes. Now, it did a couple of times in Houston when I lived there, but it's and at my dad's house. but never here. But at Mountain View, it would happen. It started to happen more often, actually. And I think I could notice when certain new people would move in. Like, and I remember I got a neighbor that she seemed fine. She was nice. I mean, I kind of felt a little from her, but nothing weird. Like, nothing that, but I would wake up and it just, I don't know how to describe it. It feels like something is there. And now that was different. Now I'm not talking about the little boys. I'm not talking about the previous inhabitants that may haunt these surroundings. This was something, this is going to sound crazy, something attached to people that were there. Does that make sense? So they would have something on them that was attached to them because I could feel that. Now that was malignant and that was threatening. And I would wake up like not able to breathe. And so I would go tap Alexa on the foot, like, so she could see it was me. And she'd be like, what? And she would say, what is wrong? And I'm like, and she goes, come on, let's pray. Because that's another level of spiritual energy in a different way, a haunting in a different way. Was not, and it wasn't, Marcy, it wasn't even just people that had severe mental health problems that or bullies. It wasn't normal negative energy. It was something else that felt like it was attached, because when that person would move out, it was gone. So did you ever have that experience? Because I'm sure there was a lot of people that you run across that their energy felt off.
Well, sure, there was, but I don't think that I ever maybe associated it to maybe some supernatural force. I think that in that environment, it's so harsh, and the things that we had to endure and survive in there, I think that I always attributed that like in myself, I did things in there that I would never have even dreamt of doing in the free world. I mean, and I just wonder what you're describing. Did someone look at me at some point and think, whoa, I need to stay away from her? Because I don't know if that's just maybe like you're saying, the negativity. I definitely believe what you put out is what's going to be there. And I think in that environment puts out so much harsh, horrific energy that is around. I don't know, Toonche.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great question.
Yeah, because it's like, somebody on the last show mentioned Cynthia at Mountain View. And if you're from Mountain View, you know who Cynthia White is. I'll tell you later, Marcy, but, hard to get along with, angry woman, which she was a bully. She's just, I think she's a hobby now, bless everybody's heart. She was the God almighty most difficult person to deal with. And one time she leaned over my cubicle and I was meditating. She would on my head, girl, she was something else. And I said, yes. She said, you know why? I was sitting here thinking, Toon, do you know why I'm so mean and angry? And I said, no, I never noticed. She said, because I got to be in this motherfucker for the rest of my life. And I know I've done things to hurt people and I can't change it. And I'm going to be here the rest of my life. All I fucking got is young and the restless. And that's it for me. And so what am I supposed to do? And I was just like, okay, she's having this big reveal moment, right? So it's like she had that negative energy and she was a bully and she was mean. But she didn't have that energy that felt malicious, even though she was a negative, mean person. And I would cut, like I said, that neighbor that moved in, an older lady that was like, hi, honey, how are you? And it was just like, mm-mm, mm-mm. And it's not, I can tell when people have mental health stuff going on, you can kind of see it in their eyes. Oh, this bitch is a bully. But this stuff would wake me up in the middle of the night. And I think those of us that experience spiritual energy, it is usually at night when you're sleeping, and it's instantaneously that and there is a feeling that it's just really hard to describe that. And like I said, that woman would move out and it was gone. So what was it? Was it something attached to her? Was it something in her? Was it just her mental health? But certainly I think that plays a lot too into things moving or things being haunted in a space. It could be somebody's energy currently. It doesn't have to be someone who previously was there.
Toonche, let me ask you this, because I'm sure someone is watching or listening right now that is thinking, did that person commit some horrific crime? Was that a part of it, or was it random?
It was random, because you would think, oh, this person, you know, threw a baby over a cliff or chopped up some old person and ate them. I'm being outrageous, but like you would think it was, or some sexual assault thing. And I remember there was little older white lady that was there for fraud, and she was a trustee. So she didn't have this egregious, violent. And I'm telling you what, she was one that stood out. That I couldn't sleep. It felt like this energy was suffocating me, like a being, not just like I feel stressed out or I'm awake and I feel kind of uncertain. It was terror, terror inside, like the terror you feel when you're a child and you have a nightmare. And it being this invisible thing on you. And when she moved out of the dorm, it left. And those things would affect the whole dorm. The whole energy of the dorm would, then we hear stuff, then we see stuff that's making, and then that person leaves and it's gone.
And that's what Desiree is saying, that she saw and felt negative spirits in other inmates, just like you're describing, Toonche. Do you remember the lady that cut her hand off? She abused her children and CPS took them. She got them back and did some horrible things with her kids. Do you know that?
Yes, I do remember this lady, and she was at Riverside. And there was obviously some deep mental illness, right? But there was a level of something spiritually is wrong here. And I hate to look at it through the lens of being raised as a Southern Baptist, which really Southern Baptists don't get down with all that kind of demon possession. That they don't really. But there is an understanding that energy can attach yourself. And she wasn't just mentally ill. This lady you felt it in your spirit that there was something on her, and it was almost like the lady wasn't there. We all knew that there was something else here than this woman. And Desiree's right. I can't believe you remember that girl. That was 1999, and I can't forget the way she looked, and she didn't have a hand. And she would terrorize us in that dorm. And then when she left, the environment got better. Again, not just mental health. There's a difference. Yeah.
Well, Annie says that white always made her smile. And then she's talking about an offender that would just sob loudly on the floor for hours, that she thought maybe had a spirit on her of some kind.
I think, and again, I don't know, and maybe that Mountain View. So the history to Mountain View is a little bit different than the Gatesville unit, like Riverside and Terrace and Sycamore. They built Mountain View later. I don't know if it was in the 50s or the 60s, and it was to house the most violent, scary, in their mind, children, right? That were being housed, that they had to get them out of the Gatesville units. And so they built Mountain View up on a hill, not understanding. So our children are getting more and more violent. Maybe it has to do with something that we're doing to them in these facilities, like sexually abusing them and beating them and other stuff. Well, of course these kids are getting more, escalated. So they built Mountain View for that. And so Mountain View was the place where there was a lawsuit that came out of there where there was some horrific abuse done to some teenage boys. So I think in terms of, we had the crisis center there, like women from all over the state, whenever they were in mental health crisis, they come here. The very cold place in NPF where you sit there and they, essentially don't give you much treatment and send you back to your unit. So the unit was made up predominantly of people with, yes, I was there for 10 years, with really serious offenses, with mental health problems, right? You have death row there. So there's a lot of energy here. There's a lot of energy, plus the history of how the unit got there to begin with. And I think that creates a vulnerability that attracts negative spiritual energy, entities, whatever you want to call it. And I certainly saw a lot of women, like Miss Annie said, that you just know, Marci, you just know this lady is not just, I'm not using the word crazy to be mean. She's not just crazy. She's not just mentally ill. There is something deeply like the terror in your soul that a demon would induce in you. Something is surrounding this woman that feels like that. It's not her fault. It's almost like she's not there, if that makes sense. And that happened a lot at Mountain View. I saw it a lot. I felt it a lot.
That sounds so, honestly, quite scary. I mean, seriously scary. I want to read this comment that Desiree put also. She said one of the host squads found bones on Hamburger Hill near Mountain View, which is just a little hill right there in Gatesville in the middle of all of those units. The squad was quickly moved, and Boss Bankhead rode his black horse with Blaze face over to mark the area. Officers were told to tell us it was animal bones, but they confided that they were certain it was runaway boys, that it was children, old children's bones.
It possibly could have been. We found bones in the. They found a piece of what looked like a jaw in the back of the unit where they were doing gardening and herb stuff. I mean, it could have been a horse jaw, it could have been a pig jaw, but it was frighteningly looked a lot like a human jaw, right? And the officers said, throw it in the compost pile. It's just a fucking dog jaw. And we're like, God, that looks like a human jaw. I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it, because these kids weren't running away. They were probably thrown out there or buried out there because the level of abuse and death that would happen. Silos, I see you, Silos. I'm not going to tell your business either, but you know that Mountain View, and I had these things happen the 10 years I was at Crane too, but the weird energy attached to people, other than that lady that was missing her hand at Riverside, I never really had that happen until Mountain View. And I think it was just because that place was so vulnerable for that type of energy to attach itself.
Well, I had went through the ice house. I went through the crisis center at Mountain View, and I want to answer. Someone said, "Let me find out you were chasing somebody." No, baby, I had a complete mental breakdown in the middle of my sentence. I completely lost my shit and ended up going. And so I wasn't there purposefully or with that intention. I just needed crisis management, quite frankly. And that, you're right. It's a different kind of darkness. I don't know about the whole unit because my experience was specifically to that building, which also did house death row in that same area. And so definitely you could feel a darkness. And I also believe that to be true for the J2 building on the Dr. Lane Murray unit. When you walk, that's where they house solitary confinement inmates. And when you walk in there, the minute you walk through, you can feel the heavy, dark energy. There's no other way to describe it. And everybody I've ever interviewed or talked to about SEG says that exact same thing about that building. For sure, that kind of stuff happened. Gosh. Yeah, that's exactly right. Somebody said, hence the reason for a random pig pen in the middle. The pig pen's right in the middle of, who knows if that was actually used for that, but you're absolutely right. There are pig pens right there in that same vicinity.
It's true.
And then I was going to say this comment. Brianna said there was a lady in our dorm that would use the restroom on her floor. She believed if she had water on her floor, it was the men who had previously raped her. She was incarcerated for killing her attackers, and she was scared they were haunting her and coming back for her. And I think I can't imagine having to being a victim of violence and then acting out and then coming to terms with what happened, right? So you're struggling with your own mental illnesses and then also struggling with trying to heal from the violence that was bestowed on you and then how you acted. And then now you're experiencing more violence from the state. So I can definitely imagine that. Silos is talking about some Mountain View.
The trench coat man, that shadow man that looked like he had a trench coat on. And you see him out of the corner of your eye in the dorms.
And
In a dorm.
He was commonly known?
Yes. It was commonly known.
Wow.
Now, that was a little that was scary. That wasn't the little boys, though. That was something else. And that's what Ms. Keene was talking about with the officers, is like, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this.
There were officers that were on the Lane Murray unit that we were like, oh yeah, I left there. I left that. I wasn't dealing with that. I wasn't dealing with them boys. I wasn't dealing with them little boys. It scared them. I want to talk a little bit about some of the hauntings in other Texas prisons. And so I was kind of surprised that there wasn't a whole lot of media based around Gatesville. When we were searching, we just kind of found a few little gems, but we found a lot about the men's unit, about in particular the unit that was in Sugarland. Should I play the video?
Do it.
Okay. I'm gonna
shut up. Always an adventure when we
I'm gonna
media.
Yeah, we'll see if it works this time, guys. And
here we go.
If it doesn't, it's Toonche.
Stop scrolling right now if you want to see something spooky. So the other day I was in Sugarland, Texas. This is a town that was founded on sugar. They closed the sugar mill a while ago and it sits abandoned in the middle of town. And let me tell you, the way that they got this sugar was terrifying. Right here, this is the entrance to the abandoned Central Unit Prison, the largest abandoned prison in all of Texas. I couldn't get as close as I wanted to get. This place is supposed to be haunted, so people break in all the time, but I drove through a residential neighborhood to go across the field so that I could get a clear shot of the prison. Here it is. It's much bigger in person, but this is from like a long distance away. This place is rumored to be extremely haunted. It was nicknamed the Hellhole in the Brazos because inmate conditions were so bad, people were basically tortured here. And the prison used convict leasing, where African-American individuals were arrested for basically nothing and then provided free labor for the sugar mill in town. It was basically a new form of slavery. A few years ago, they discovered 98 bodies of convict lease victims in Sugarland, and I'm going to that cemetery next.
There you are.
Well, you did it. It played, honey. I'm so impressed with you right now that I just want to tell you that was perfect. You did it. You nailed it. After 3 months of this, you got it.
Well,
got it.
You could have just stopped.
I could have just stopped. I'm sorry. I was on the phone with Serena before this, and I give her the business the way you give me the business.
You literally could have just said, "Hey, great job. I'm so proud of you." And then you had to throw in the backhanded on media. So Carrie says that Sugarland was a very heavy unit to visit. And then she also goes on to say that Central Unit also housed sex offenders. Did you notice that every single men's prison that we had to come in contact with, they would say that's where the sex offenders are?
Because there were so many programs. There were so many.
I thought that they almost said it to us as a deterrent, because when I was in Dayton at the Plain State Jail, that unit that was right there, that was the
Yep,
men's
that
unit,
is the
they'd be like,
sex
don't look over
offense
there.
program.
That's all the sex offenders. And then when we went through whatever unit we used to
Was it
stop
gory?
at, yeah, through Gory, they'd be like, don't look at them. This is houses all the sex offenders. And I remember thinking, well, why the hell do you have the women stopping here if this is where the sex offenders are? And then we get to Gatesville and I'm on Murray and they talk about Hughes unit. That's where the sex offenders are. Are there just that many?
Yes, honey, there is.
How horrifying.
So, well, and the thing about going through Goree too, just as a side note, so the men would be doing atrocious things right out in the open while we're walking through the gate, through the Sally Port to go in the chow hall, just out in the open, and the officers would yell at us, "Stop looking, don't pay attention." It was our fault that they were sexually harassing us, essentially.
Not essentially, Toonche. It not essentially, and I'll just put it out there because you try to kind of tippy toe around, but I'm talking about penis in your hand kind of action when
Yeah.
we would walk by, either standing at their window or at their cell door. And you're right, the officers are not telling them to move.
Yeah, they would yell at us.
They would
Well,
yell
if you wouldn't be, you need to pull your shirt more this way. You need to face that way. And this is, I mean, it was always our fault.
quit twisting. Well, you're twisting.
Why do you have your hair up? Put your hair down instead. It was just always something. I do want to say this about Central Unit. So when Central Unit was still in operation, and what the guy said in the video was absolutely 100% true. That is the history to the Central Unit. It really was this bad, y'all. If you can see this picture, those of you that are just listening, I went to the Central Unit when I worked at AIDS Foundation Houston, and we would go into the prisons to train people how to be peer health educators. And so we had a training out at the Central Unit, and it was this horrific. And I remember going in there, and I'd been to men's units that were not air conditioning and of poor quality, right? But Central Unit, I had to go to the bathroom, and the energy there is that energy of despair, disgust, atrocious conditions. It did have, like you said, walking into SEG times 10. That unit was that bad in terms of energy and deplorable conditions. So I have no doubt that what the gentleman was saying was true, because I've been to that unit. I've been to it, and it was briefly. And I told my boss at the time, I hope that was the only training we're doing there, because I feel so bad for those guys. I don't ever want to be back. It was disgusting. It was disgusting.
And Carrie's talking about Ghost Adventures did do an investigation out there. They did a whole show, and that's where these two pictures that I showed actually came from. And there was a lot online regarding this unit and the hauntings that took place there. And that's just kind of like prisons in general kind of are the perfect breeding ground. Like prisons, mental institutions, hospitals, things where traumatic events evolving around death, that's kind of where we always hear these scary stories out of.
So, Marci, do you want to show them? Now you got feedback all of a sudden.
I don't know why. Nothing changed.
Okay, let's see. Okay, that was weird. See, that's the AI is haunting us inside of this program right now. Do you want to show them the article about just how distasteful the Texas Department of Criminal Justice used these horrific stories? And it's one thing when we as formerly incarcerated people talk about our experiences. They're ours, and we own them, and we have a right to them. But when the state itself tries to capitalize on the energy of state-sanctioned violence, essentially, for Halloween, would you like to share with everybody what happened a couple of years ago?
I freaking, first of all, love that you have so much faith in me,
I do.
that I can quickly share my screen, and so
I
I'm
feel
gonna
like you
give it a
can.
go, and if you give me hell about
I'm
it.
not. You've taught me. I've
Okay,
learned. I
okay,
learned my lesson.
so here we go. I'm gonna share the screen,
Okay, we're doing it.
and here I am on
Here we
here.
go. We got it.
Dun,
Look
dun,
at that.
dun.
Honey, this is perfect.
So, you want me to read a little bit?
Sure, yes, that'd be great.
Okay, I'm gonna close this up because I don't know what he's talking about over here. Many have reported a strange feeling in the building. Uh-oh. Look, see now? What'd I do? How did I lose it?
Honey, it just
Toonche,
it's
the art
okay.
is gone. You're gonna
It's
have
okay. Okay, I've got it. I'll screen share on mine.
Yeah, shame on
Okay.
you.
Oh, I was just giving you a power and authority. So let me try it, okay?
Okay, let's do that.
Let's do it.
Did I stop?
Okay. Is it here? Do you see it?
No, I don't see it.
Oh, you have to turn it on. On the side, you have to allow me
Okay, I'm looking. Oh,
in
I
the
see.
studio. Got it? Oh, okay, great.
Ah,
So what this was Spooky Week. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice, for Halloween one year, and this was in October 2020. What they were doing on their social media is that they were highlighting units with ghost stories. Okay. Right here it says, day one of our spooky week takes us right to the heart of TDCJ in Huntsville, where the oldest penitentiary in the state still resides, and maybe a few past residents as well, past few inhabitants. Well, who would those past inhabitants be? The people that they killed on death row, right? So throughout the week, they're highlighting different stuffs, and oh, it's spooky, scary. The halls, you can hear them roaming, the former residents. Marci, how did that make you feel when I showed you this as a
oh, well,
person?
yeah, it just like further victimized basically the oppressors or the institutions that caused this kind of traumatic event that would even bring a haunting were making light of it. And I don't know what they were doing. I don't know. And they realized that they were out of line too after they got called out.
Right. After lots of us complained, the author of the article says, I found the TDCJ effort tasteless, tone deaf, and in general just unnecessary. Regardless of your general feelings about felons, I saw no reason to glean entertainment from their incarceration. The history of our Texas prison system is not a proud one. And to use those stories in such a distasteful way to celebrate Halloween, and like this is entertainment. And this is why I hate those throwback pictures. As soon as I see pictures from women back in 1950 looking quaint and wonderful and singing at the rodeos, I'm like, oh yeah, don't forget y'all used to beat them with a belt. So let's not glorify the past, and let's not use trauma. The state that is inflicting the violence to then turn around and use it as entertainment. Now, if you and I, as formerly incarcerated people, or most of our guests here, if we want to talk about stories and share community and kind of, try to understand our experience and, have a laugh or a gasp at things that we collectively experience, that's ours. We have every right to that. And it's to educate folks. But to have the state use it simply for entertainment was just absolutely one of the most tasteless things they've done. Really.
It was just reminds me of when you would see after a use of force in the penitentiary, and you would see some of the officers joking about it and kind of patting each other on the back and laughing about having to spray someone in the face with pepper spray or restrain them with their knee in their back, 3 men on 1 girl. I mean, these are it's those kind of vibes. It's I'll just say it's little dick in energy, quite frankly. It's ugly.
I do. We're getting down to 5 minutes, and I noticed. I think it was Desiree. I'm not sure. It might be someone else that met Carla Faye. Never had that towards Renee, and I believe she passed away not long ago. But Carla Faye was the first woman put to death in, I don't know how long it was, 100 years or something. And this was in 1997. And this story is told by Pam Perillo, who we both know. Pam's interview is on my YouTube, and she tells the story of her and Carla's friendship. They were on death row for a long time together. And maybe this is a happy, haunting, spiritual story to end on. The chaplain at the time allowed the ladies that wanted to go to the chapel and pray during the hour that Carla was executed. They gathered in the chapel. After that, they were just killing women. They didn't care. And it was just business as usual. Nobody, allowed us to have a moment. But for Carla, they did. And I just got to prison. I was at Riverside. But the ladies at Mountain View said when they went to the chapel to pray, and the moment at the exact time that they knew that injection was happening, the lights above the cross in the front, because there used to be a cross there, that shining light on the podium and on the stage, the electricity went off, and that flickered, and that began to flicker. And then after about 30 seconds, it came back on. And they were like, it was at the exact moment. And was it a coincidence? Maybe, but the lights had never flickered like that in the chapel before. And it was right at that moment. And we all just began to cry, and we knew that Carla was okay, and she was safe, and she was with God. And so that at least was a bittersweet moment of overcoming state-sanctioned violence. And we found a way to communicate that to one another. So, or it could have just been something in the fuse box, Marci. But what it symbolized to people was that perhaps there was hope after all the terrible things that we've all been through.
And maybe there is. Maybe there is. And if that was a fuse box at that exact time, or if that was some officer somewhere messing with the lights, it's still, I think it's still okay to accept that as what you all felt during that time, as what they felt during that time. So,
well, we have come almost to the end of the hour. And if, as usual, we take something fun and lighthearted and completely analyze it to very painful.
we just bring it all the way down.
God bless.
I don't know how
we just, Marci, it's just not in us to keep things. We just can't. We try so deeply. Late night was good. We'll have more sessions. We'll call them late night sessions, where we just sit around and eat. Maybe we'll invite a guest and we'll just chop it up. But our advocacy hearts just can't let things. We're like, no, but let us tell you the history.
Right. Why the prison industrial complex was born, and how much drama was endured that caused things to be haunted. Absolutely. Well, we have to decide what we're talking about next week. Do we want to lighten up? What do you guys think? We need your help. What do y'all
what do y'all want to talk about next week? So we'll give you a few minutes to put it in the chat there. So
yeah, you guys be thinking about that. And there is a Facebook group called Life After Crane. And she said that they are welcoming anybody who did time, any lady who did time in Texas. So And this is my beautiful mom. Now, Gerald is my dad. She's under his account watching the show. And she said she enjoyed the show. Hi, Mom. So Casey says maybe talk about Diane Holmes is getting along, how she's Diane Holmes.
I think maybe you mean Elizabeth Holmes?
Maybe.
I don't know. Well, I don't know. She's in the women's fed prison in Texas. She's not getting along well. That's a notorious, horrible women's federal unit, by the
In
way.
Bryan?
Yes.
Is it notorious for being bad? Because I'll tell you what, everything I read about it looked a lot better than a Texas state prison.
Oh, no. I mean, in terms of the federal system,
Okay.
but like versus the state, I mean, yeah, it's still 1,000 times better, but I just meant within the federal system.
Yeah, because I got a little salty researching her case that she, that she was doing a lot easier time. What were some of the ideas? You guys are supposed to be helping us. Veronica, come with it. What are we talking
Come with it. Come with it. You know, maybe Marci, we can talk. I don't know. I feel like you're right. Sometimes I am such Debbie Downer. I feel like it would be interesting as formerly incarcerated women, and we kind of touched on it already tonight, talking about, people who have committed sex offenses. So how do we reconcile that as people who are abolitionists? Well, what do we do with people that have sexual violence towards women? Because that's a touchy, raw spot for almost all of us. So how do we reconcile that? We could talk about that. Of course, that it's a little bit heavier. And I feel like several people are already trying to let us know they want to talk about people that have been in the news. We can do that.
I like your idea, Toonche, and I feel like we should put that on the back burner for possible options the week after and listen to what the people are asking for. And we could talk about some of the high profile cases. And I'm not going to be too salty about the people that stole millions and millions of dollars and got 10 years or less. And I stole, less than 367,000. I'm not going to be ugly about that, or I'm not going to be salty the whole time and bring everybody down, but let's do that.
Okay, we can talk about Elizabeth and maybe poor Lori. Not my wife. We're not talking about my wife, but we're talking about poor Lori
Vallow.
Lori
Vallow.
These are tough things. They really are.
We could talk about some high profile cases and some celebrities and how we think that they're getting along and how they would get along in a Texas prison, what that would look like for them.
What does that look like for our friends that were notorious and celebrities in prison?
And we have some.
We do.
So, we could just touch on that without diving into their
that
story.
Damn Yolanda always fucking up my library every weekend after I cleaned it up and they took them in there.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Let's move on. Let's do that. But this is also an idea for another time, how programs that are in there have helped us out here. So maybe bringing some of the gems that we were taught inside to the free world. That's a good one also. Thank you for that. But let's do the high profile. Let's do it. We had a couple people ask about that, and
Fetch Banana. Golly, that's a great.
I love the great names. We got to wrap this up, girl. And I used to have some end music, and I wasn't ready.
I don't
know how I did that. So we'll just have to call it quits, guys.
Let's just do our way. Don't play any more music.
Oh my gosh. Love y'all. Thanks for hanging out with us. We will be live the same time, same place on the Rec Yard next Wednesday night. See